The stray cat kept scratching the wall. Then a policeman smashed the wall and screamed. What if the policeman's desperate act of smashing the wall unleashed more than just memories and a hidden trinket? Could the true secret guarded by generations of white cats be something far more unsettling, a truth that Oak Haven itself has tried to forget? Like, subscribe, and listen closely as the whispers from the past reveal a shocking twist that will redefine everything. The sledgehammer fell from Arthur Jenkins' trembling hands, clattering onto the splintered wood and broken concrete at his feet. He stood, panting, chest heaving, the vibrant red of his face slowly draining to a ghastly pale. The silence that descended was thick, broken only by his ragged breaths, and the distant chirping of a bewildered sparrow. Mrs. Henderson, from across the street, her hand clapped over her mouth, was the first to move, her initial shock giving way to a hesitant concern. Other neighbors began to emerge more fully. A mixture of fear and morbid curiosity in their eyes, Arthur didn't seem to notice them. His gaze was fixed on the gaping hole he'd created in the side of Eleanor Ainsworth's house. It was a brutal, jagged wound in the faded gray clapboard, revealing the dark, musty space between the studs. Dust motes danced in the slivers of afternoon sun that now penetrated the gloom. He took a stumbling step closer, then another, his boots crunching on the debris. He reached into the cavity, his arm disappearing up to the shoulder. For a moment, he fumbled, a low groan escaping his lips. Then slowly, he withdrew his hand. Clutched in it was not what anyone might have expected. No hidden treasure, no illicit stash. It was a small dented tin box, the kind that once held cookies or sewing supplies. Its painted flowers faded and scratched. He sank to his knees, the rough edges of the broken wall scraping against his trousers. Oblivious, his broad shoulders, usually so straight and imposing, were slumped. He cradled the tin box as if it were a fragile newborn thing. The earlier fury had vanished, replaced by an expression of such profound, hollow grief that it silenced any impending questions from the onlookers. He fumbled with the lid, his thick fingers clumsy. It gave way with a rusty screech. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, lay a single old-fashioned audio cassette tape and a small leather-bound diary, its pages brittle with age. Arthur picked up the cassette. His thumb traced the handwritten label. The ink faded, but still legible. For Artie. When the time is right. The name, Artie, was one no one in Oak Haven had ever heard him called. It was a name from a different life, a different time. He stared at it, and a single tear, then another, traced a path through the grime on his cheek. The primal scream had been shocking, the destruction of the wall inexplicable, but this quiet sorrow, this raw, unveiled pain from a man known for his impenetrable composure, was somehow more disturbing. The neighbors watched a silent, uneasy circle as Arthur Jenkins, the man they thought they knew, began to unravel. Before their eyes, the secrets of a dead woman's house clutched in his trembling hands. The white cat, now recovered from its initial fright, crept back cautiously, settling a few feet away, its luminous green eyes fixed on the broken man and the mysteries he had just violently unearthed. Arthur Jenkins had been a cop for 40 years, rising through the ranks of the Oak Haven Police Department to captain before an angioplasty, and the gentle insistence of his late wife Martha convinced him to retire. He was a man of routine and order. His lawn was always perfectly edged, his car gleamed, and his days were structured with the same precision he'd once applied to crime scene investigations. Since Martha's passing 5 years ago from a swift and merciless cancer, that routine had become his lifeline, a bulwark against the encroaching silence of his empty house. Eleanor Ainsworth had been his neighbor for 30 of those years, a quiet, somewhat reclusive woman, a retired librarian. She'd lived alone in the gray house on the corner since her husband, a military man, had died young long before Arthur and Martha moved in. Eleanor and Martha had developed a gentle friendship built on shared cups of tea, exchanged books, and a mutual understanding of quiet companionship. Arthur, always more reserved, had maintained a polite, neighborly distance, though he'd always kept a protective eye on Eleanor, especially after Martha was gone. He'd mow her lawn if it got too long, fix a leaky faucet, or ensure her walk was shoveled in winter. Small kindnesses, unspoken but consistent. When Eleanor passed away in her sleep 3 years ago, it was Arthur who found her alerted by the uncollected newspapers on her porch. She had no close relatives, and her house, willed to a distant, uninterested cousin, had sat vacant ever since a slow decay settling over it like a shroud. The cousin, based somewhere in California, had made a token effort to clear it out, taking a few pieces of antique furniture, but mostly leaving Eleanor's life to gather dust. The white cat appeared about a year after Eleanor's death. It was a stray, skittish at first, but undeniably drawn to Eleanor's property. It would sit on her porch, sun itself on her overgrown lawn, and most peculiarly, it would scratch at one specific spot on the western wall of the house near the overgrown rose bushes Eleanor had been so proud of. Arthur had noticed it, of course. He'd initially tried to shoo it away, worried it might be damaging the property further or that it might be rabid. But the cat was persistent, and its scratching, while focused, didn't seem to be doing significant harm to the already weathered clapboard. It was more of a determined, almost rhythmic pawing, as if it were trying to get at something. Over time, Arthur had grown accustomed to the cat even leaving out a bowl of water for it during the hot summer months. He'd named it Snow for its pristine fur, though he never voiced the name aloud. The cat's strange fixation with the wall became a small, ignorable quirk of his daily landscape. The inciting incident, the spark that ignited the shocking events of that afternoon, wasn't a sudden revelation or a dramatic discovery. It was insidious, a slow burn of grief and a dawning, unsettling connection. The previous week had marked the 5th anniversary of Martha's death. The grief, which Arthur usually managed to keep tightly leashed, had been particularly acute. He'd found himself wandering through his own quiet house, the silence pressing in on him. Martha's absence, a palpable ache. He'd been sitting on his porch, watching Snow methodically scratch at Eleanor's wall, the repetitive sound, a dull counterpoint to his own bleak thoughts. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch, scratch, pause. Suddenly, an image had flashed into his mind. Martha, laughing, her head thrown back, standing by those same rose bushes with Eleanor, a small mischievous smile on her face as she whispered something to her friend. Eleanor had then glanced towards the wall, a fleeting, almost secretive look. It was nothing, a trick of memory perhaps, but the image combined with the cat's unwavering obsession planted a seed of unease. What if the cat wasn't just being a cat? What if Eleanor, in her quiet way, had hidden something Martha might have known about? The thought was absurd, the product of a grieving mind, he told himself. Yet it wouldn't leave him. For days he watched the cat. He found himself staring at that section of wall, an inexplicable pull, a growing certainty that there was something there. The rational part of his brain, the seasoned cop, dismissed it. But the lonely widower, the man desperate for any connection, however tenuous, to the woman he'd lost, couldn't let it go. The pressure built a strange confluence of sorrow, a wild, improbable hope, and an almost superstitious belief in the cat's instinct. Until that afternoon, when the internal dam finally broke and the sledgehammer in his garage seemed to call to him. His initial goal wasn't destruction, but discovery. A desperate, irrational need to know what lay beneath those persistent scratching paws. The immediate aftermath of Arthur's outburst was a blur of concerned neighbors, the distant wail of a siren someone had inevitably called the police, his former colleagues, and a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. He'd allowed himself to be led back to his own house by a shaken but kind Mrs. Henderson. The tin box clutched tightly in his hand. The responding officers, young men who knew Captain Jenkins by reputation, if not personally, were visibly uncomfortable. They listened to his fragmented explanation. The cat, Eleanor, Martha, I just had to know. With a mixture of pity and bewilderment. Legally, he was in trouble, destruction of property, trespassing. But the owner of Eleanor's house, the distant cousin when finally reached, was surprisingly indifferent. The place is a wreck anyway, he'd said over a crackling phone line. Sell it for land value if you can just deal with it. He seemed more annoyed by the interruption than the damage. The local police chief, a man Arthur had mentored, quietly arranged for the incident to be handled with a fine and a stern warning, citing temporary emotional distress. Oak Haven, for the most part, was willing to look the other way, attributing Arthur's actions to the eccentricities of grief. But for Arthur, the real complication had just begun. The tin box sat on his kitchen table, a Pandora's box of unknown emotional impact. The diary was Eleanor's, her neat, spidery handwriting filling its pages. The cassette tape, however, was the object of both his intense hope and his deepest fear for Artie. When the time is right, Martha's handwriting, Martha's voice. He couldn't bring himself to play it. Not yet. The thought of hearing her voice again after 5 years of silence was overwhelming. What if it was a goodbye? What if it was something painful? He needed to understand the context. He turned to Eleanor's diary first. The diary entries were mundane. At first, notes about her garden books she'd read, observations about the weather. But as he delved deeper around the time Martha had first gotten sick, the tone began to shift. Eleanor wrote of Martha's courage, her quiet strength, and her own feelings of helplessness. Then an entry dated a few weeks before Martha's death. Martha came over today looking so frail, but with that familiar spark in her eyes. She had a small tape recorder. She asked me for a favor, a secret to keep. She's recorded something for Arthur, for later, she said, when he needs it most. She made me promise to give it to him, but only when the time felt right. How will I know? She also entrusted me with a small sealed letter for him to be given with the tape. We put them in the old biscuit tin, the one with the faded roses, and I tucked it away behind the loose board in my west wall. My little secret hiding spot from when I was a girl. She said it felt safer there than in her own house, less likely for him to stumble upon it before he was ready. She worries so much about him being alone. Arthur's breath hitched. A letter, too. He frantically searched the tin box again, his hands shaking. Tucked beneath the yellowed cotton, almost invisible, was a thin cream-colored envelope, sealed with a faded wax stamp of a forget-me-not, Martha's favorite flower, addressed simply, "My dearest Artie." The weight of it all pressed down on him. Martha had planned this. She had foreseen his grief, his loneliness, and had tried to leave him a lifeline. And Eleanor, dear quiet, Eleanor had been its faithful guardian. The cat Snow hadn't been scratching at random. Animals, they said, had senses humans lacked. Had it sensed the lingering presence of Eleanor's care or even Martha's love embedded within that wall? Or perhaps it was simply the faint lingering scent of the old biscuit tin, something familiar from Eleanor's time. Whatever the reason, the cat had been the unlikely key. He spent the next few days in a state of suspended animation. He'd pick up the tape, then the letter, then put them down again. He read more of Eleanor's diary. He learned of her own quiet sorrows, her loneliness after her husband's death, her small joys. He saw his own grief mirrored in her words, decades apart. He felt a connection to her he'd never experienced when she was alive. His former colleagues dropped by ostensibly to check on him, but also out of a lingering curiosity. He offered them coffee, spoke in monosyllables, and revealed nothing of the tin box's contents. The neighbors were more circumspect, offering sympathetic smiles and casseroles he barely touched. The biggest obstacle was internal. The fear of what the tape and letter contained warred with his desperate need to hear from Martha again. He imagined her voice, her laughter, her gentle admonishments. He also imagined her pain, her fear of leaving him. Was he strong enough to face it one evening as a soft rain began to fall, mirroring the gloom in his heart? Snow appeared at his back door, meowing insistently. Arthur, who had never let the cat inside, found himself opening the door. Snow padded in, shook the rain from its fur, and after a moment's inspection, curled up on the rug by the fireplace as if it belonged there. Seeing the cat so calm, so certain in its place, seemed to unlock something in Arthur. Martha had loved animals. She would have approved. He looked at the tin box, then at the cat purring softly. The right time Eleanor had written about. Perhaps it wasn't a specific moment, but a state of readiness. And perhaps with an unlikely feline companion by his side, he was finally getting there. He knew he couldn't delay any longer. He had to face Martha's last message. The rising action was his internal struggle. The complications were the emotional weight of the discovery and the fear of the unknown contents. The cat's acceptance into his home was a small turning point, nudging him toward the next step. The old cassette player sat on the dusty shelf in Arthur's study, a relic from a time before streaming services and digital playlists. It had been Martha's used for playing audiobooks during her illness. He hadn't touched it in 5 years. His hands trembled as he retrieved it, wiping away a layer of dust with the sleeve of his shirt. He inserted the tape, the plastic casing clicking softly into place. The letter lay on the desk beside it, its seal still unbroken. He took a deep breath, the air in the room feeling suddenly too thick, too heavy. Snow, who had followed him into the study, rubbed against his leg, a soft purr vibrating through its small body. Arthur reached down and stroked the cat's head, a small grounding gesture. Then he pressed play. A hiss of static, then a click, and then her voice. "Artie, is this thing on? Oh heavens, I hope this works." Martha's voice so achingly familiar, yet also distant, like an echo from a dream. It was a little shaky, a little breathless, but unmistakably her laughter light and airy followed. Eleanor is looking at me like I've lost my marbles, trying to figure out this contraption, but I needed to do this. Arthur closed his eyes, tears pricking at their corners. It wasn't a goodbye, not in the way he'd feared. It was just Martha talking to him. Listen, my love. Her voice continued softer now, more serious. If you're hearing this, it means I'm not there to nag you in person anymore. A small, self-deprecating chuckle, and Eleanor, bless her heart, has finally decided you're ready. Or maybe that persistent cat of hers finally clawed its way to your conscience. Arthur's eyes snapped open. That persistent cat of hers, Eleanor hadn't owned a cat, not in all the years he'd known her. Snow was a stray. Or was it he remembered the photo from the tin box, Eleanor younger, with a soldier and a white cat? Could it be? No, that was impossible. Cats didn't live that long, but the certainty in Martha's voice. Don't look so surprised, Artie. Martha's voice seemed to tease, as if she could see his bewildered expression. Eleanor always had a soft spot for strays, just like someone else I know. She told me about the little white one that kept visiting her, the one she swore was the spitting image of her Snowball from years ago. She even thought it was Snowball. Come back to her, said it would scratch at the wall near her roses, right where she used to sit with him. Funny, isn't it, how things come around? Arthur's mind reeled. The cat, Eleanor's Snowball. It wasn't just a random stray. It was a connection, a thread woven through decades linking Eleanor's past with his present. The cat scratching hadn't been random. It had been a call to a memory, a habit, ingrained perhaps in a lineage of felines drawn to that spot, or if one dared to believe in such things, something more. Martha's voice pulled him back. There's a letter with this tape. Artie read it. It's important. But first, I wanted you to hear my voice. I wanted to tell you that it's okay to be sad. It's okay to miss me, but it's not okay to stop living. You have so much life left, my love. So much good you can still do. Don't let my going be the end of your sunshine. Her voice cracked, then a hint of the pain she must have been hiding. This is harder than I thought. I just want you to be happy, Artie. Find joy again, laugh again, maybe even find someone again someday. Don't you dare look scandalized. Her old familiar bossiness was there, a comforting echo. Life is for living, and my life was so much richer because you were in it. The tape clicked off, plunging the room into silence, a silence now filled with the ghost of her presence. Arthur sat stunned. This wasn't just a message. It was a directive, a plea, a gift of permission. He had been reacting to his grief passively, letting it consume him. Now Martha was proactively telling him to fight, to live. His gaze fell upon the letter. With newfound resolve, he picked it up. His fingers still trembling, but with a different energy. Now broke the wax seal. The letter wasn't long. It spoke of her love, her hopes for him. But then a paragraph made him sit bolt upright. There's something else, Artie, something I probably should have told you sooner, but the time was never right. And then, remember, old Mr. Henderson, Eleanor's father, the one who was a bit of a recluse, a bit eccentric. Eleanor told me a story once, something her father had told her, about a small stash of gold coins he'd hidden in the house during the Depression for a rainy day that never quite came for him. He never told anyone exactly where. Not even Eleanor's mother, Eleanor, always thought it was just an old man's tall tale. But after he passed, she found a cryptic note in his papers, something about where the roses watched the sun set. She never found anything and eventually dismissed it. But Artie, with the house being sold and you, well, you always were a good detective. Maybe it's nothing, but maybe it's a little adventure for you, a puzzle to solve, something to get your mind working on, something other than me. Gold coins, hidden treasure. It sounded like something out of a dime store novel. Yet Martha had written it. Eleanor's roses watched the sun set on the western wall. The wall the cat had been scratching. The wall he had just smashed. Suddenly, Arthur wasn't just a grieving widower. He was a detective again, a puzzle dropped in his lap by his late wife, a mystery whispered from beyond the grave by two women who had cared for him. The shock of the tape, the revelation about the cat, and now this improbable treasure hunt, it was a profound turning point. He was no longer just reacting to loss. He had a purpose, a task, however outlandish it seemed. Martha had given him a reason to step out of the shadows of his grief and engage with the world again, not just for her, but for himself. The point of no return had been reached. He couldn't go back to his passive sorrow. He had to see this through. The revelation of a potential hidden treasure shifted Arthur's world on its axis. The initial shock and grief from Martha's tape and letter began to meld with a new unfamiliar sensation, a flicker of excitement, the resurrection of an old instinct. The detective in him, dormant for 5 years, stirred gold coins. It sounded preposterous, yet Martha's earnestness, relayed through her letter, made it impossible to dismiss entirely. His first challenge was practical. Eleanor's house. He'd already made one unauthorized entry, resulting in considerable damage. He couldn't just go back in sledgehammer or not. He needed legitimate access. He contacted the distant cousin again, the one in California. This time, Arthur didn't mention treasure. He spoke of wanting to salvage some of Eleanor's old rose bushes, a sentimental gesture for Martha's sake, and perhaps look for any other personal mementos the cousin might have overlooked before the property was inevitably sold or demolished. He offered a modest sum for the inconvenience and for anything he might remove. The cousin, still largely indifferent, agreed, faxing him a hastily written permission slip. "Knock yourself out," he'd said. "Just don't cause any more explosions." Armed with permission, Arthur began his investigation. The hole he'd made in the wall was his starting point, where the roses watched the sun set. That was the west wall precisely, where the old gnarled stems of Eleanor's prized roses still clung, though now untended and wild. He'd already found the biscuit tin there. Had Eleanor's father hidden his stash in the same general vicinity, he spent days at Eleanor's house. It was a strange experience being surrounded by the remnants of her quiet life. Dust lay thick on everything, the air heavy with the scent of old paper, dried lavender, and faint lingering perfume. He felt like an archaeologist sifting through the layers of someone else's history. Snow the white cat became his silent companion, often watching him from a sunny windowsill or the top of a bookshelf, its presence a comforting, almost supervisory constant. He started with the damaged section of the wall, carefully removing more plaster and lath, searching for any hidden compartments or loose stones in the foundation. He found old newspapers stuffed in as insulation, a child's lost marble, a desiccated mouse skeleton, but no gold. He consulted local historical records trying to find blueprints of the house, anything that might indicate unusual construction or later modifications. The house was old, built in the early 1900s. Records were sparse. He spoke to some of the older Oak Haven residents, those who might remember Eleanor's father. Mr. Henderson most recalled him as a quiet, frugal man, a gardener by trade, not someone they'd imagine having a secret stash of gold. This only deepened the mystery. Was Martha, and by extension, Eleanor, mistaken? The challenges were mounting. The physical labor was taxing for a man his age, even one who kept himself relatively fit. The emotional toll was also significant. Being in Eleanor's house, so full of memories, constantly reminded him of Martha, of shared moments of losses. There were times he wanted to give up, to dismiss it all as a flight of fancy, a grieving man's folly. This was his dark night of the soul moment. He sat one evening on Eleanor's dusty porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, feeling a profound sense of loneliness and futility. What was he even doing? Chasing a ghost story in a dead woman's house. Snow padded onto his lap, purring, and nudged its head against his hand. He looked at the cat, its calm, unwavering gaze. Martha had believed, Eleanor had searched. The cat had persisted. He owed it to them and to himself to see it through. He shifted his focus. If not in the wall itself, where else could "Where the roses watch the sunset" refer to? He studied the area outside. The rose bushes were overgrown, a tangled thicket. He spent a painstaking day carefully pruning them back, his hands scratched and sore. Beneath one of the largest, oldest bushes, almost swallowed by the earth, he found a flat, moss-covered stone that didn't quite match the others in the rudimentary garden path. His heart quickened. He fetched a trowel and a small shovel from his own shed. The stone was heavy, difficult to move. He had to use a crowbar to lever it up. Beneath, it was not a cavity filled with gold, but a small rotted wooden box, similar in size to the biscuit tin. It was falling apart, the wood soft and damp. With trembling fingers, he lifted the remains of the lid. Inside, nestled in the decaying wood, was a small oilskin pouch. It was unexpectedly heavy. He loosened the drawstring, his breath catching in his throat. He tipped the contents into his hand. Not gold coins. Instead, a collection of old, tarnished silver dollars, a few pieces of antique silver jewelry, a locket, a pair of earrings, and a small folded piece of paper, preserved remarkably well within the oilskin. He unfolded the paper. It was a note in a spidery, old-fashioned hand. Mr. Henderson's. Eleanor, my dear girl, if you find this, it means I'm gone, and you're a little richer. Not gold as the stories might have it. That was always a bit of bluster on my part to feel important. But honest silver, saved from harder times. Use it wisely. Perhaps for those books you love, or to make your garden even more beautiful. Know that your father loved you. The real treasure was always you and your mother. Arthur sat back on his heels, a slow smile spreading across his face. It wasn't the hoard Martha's letter had hinted at, not the stuff of legends, but it was real. It was Mr. Henderson's legacy, a father's love expressed in saved silver, and in its own way, it was a treasure. He had found it. He had solved the puzzle. Martha's little adventure for him had reached its conclusion. The final preparations for the climax were complete. He had the silver, he had the note, and he had a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The climax wouldn't be a dramatic confrontation, but a quiet resolution, a sharing of this discovery. The climax of Arthur's journey wasn't a moment of high-octane action, but one of quiet, profound connection. He sat in his own familiar armchair, the silver dollars and jewelry spread out on the coffee table, glinting softly in the lamplight. Mr. Henderson's note lay beside them. Snow was curled on the hearth, occasionally twitching its ears as if listening. He had called Sarah Eleanor's grandniece, the closest living relative he could find. After some diligent searching, Eleanor's indifferent California cousin had mentioned a more sentimental branch of the family. Sarah lived a few states over a young teacher with a kind voice. He'd simply told her he'd found some personal items of her great-grandfather's while clearing out Eleanor's house and thought she might like to have them. When Sarah arrived the next day, she was a woman in her late 20s. With Eleanor's gentle eyes, Arthur led her into the living room. He didn't embellish the story with tales of his destructive entry or Martha's ghostly guidance. He simply explained how he'd been tending to Eleanor's roses and stumbled upon the stone and then the box. He showed her the silver, the jewelry, and finally, Mr. Henderson's note. As Sarah read her great-grandfather's words, her eyes filled with tears. I never knew him," she whispered, tracing the faded ink with her fingertip. "My grandmother, Eleanor's sister. She sometimes spoke of him, said he was a man of few words, but deep feelings. This," she looked up at Arthur, her expression one of immense gratitude, "this is like hearing his voice. Thank you. I can't imagine Eleanor knew this was here." "I think she suspected," Arthur said softly. "Her diary mentioned a family story, a cryptic note. She looked but never found it." He paused. "Your great-aunt Eleanor was a good friend to my wife Martha. And Martha would have wanted you to have this." He then did something he hadn't planned. He told Sarah about the biscuit tin about Eleanor, safeguarding Martha's last message to him. He didn't play the tape that was too personal, but he shared the essence of it. Martha's wish for him to live fully, and her playful hint about Eleanor's father's treasure. "So in a way," Sarah said, a tearful smile on her face, "your wife and my great-aunt conspired to lead you to this and that little white cat?" She glanced at Snow, who blinked slowly. It seems he was the guardian of all their secrets. Arthur nodded. The central question of what lay hidden, what the cat was trying to reveal, what Martha wanted him to find, had been answered. It wasn't about monetary wealth, not really. It was about connection, about love that transcended death, about small, preserved kindnesses. The silver was a tangible link to Sarah's past, a gift from ancestors. For Arthur, the true treasure had been the journey itself, the rediscovery of purpose and the gentle untangling of grief, guided by the love of two women and the instincts of a remarkable cat. The smashing of the wall, the primal scream, had been the violent overture to this quiet, healing symphony. In the weeks that followed, a subtle but significant shift occurred in Arthur Jenkins's life. The discovery of Mr. Henderson's silver, and more importantly, the sharing of it with Sarah, had brought a sense of closure. Sarah, deeply touched, insisted on splitting the modest value of the silver with him. But Arthur gently refused. "Martha's adventure for me was the finding, not the keeping," he told her. He did, however, accept a framed photograph of a young Eleanor and her sister Sarah's grandmother, which Sarah found amongst Eleanor's remaining belongings. It now sat on his mantelpiece, Eleanor's house was eventually sold. The new owners, a young family, were charmed by its old-fashioned character and planned a careful restoration. Arthur watched the renovations with a sense of peace. The gaping hole he'd made in the wall now expertly repaired a faint scar hidden beneath fresh paint. He even offered the new owners some of Eleanor's surviving rose cuttings, which they gratefully accepted. The biggest change was in Arthur himself. The heavy cloak of grief hadn't vanished entirely. Martha would always be a part of him, her absence a tender ache, but it no longer defined him. He started volunteering at the local library, a nod to Eleanor, helping to reshelve books, and occasionally reading stories to children. He reconnected with old friends, accepting invitations he would have previously declined. He even started taking Snow for short-leashed walks around the neighborhood, much to the amusement of his neighbors who had come to view the man and his cat with a newfound affectionate understanding. The tin box with Martha's tape and letter remained in his study. He didn't play the tape often, but knowing it was there, knowing her voice was just a button press away, was a comfort. He'd reread her letter sometimes, her words a gentle encouragement. Life is for living. He was trying, truly trying to honor that his routine was still important, but it was no longer a rigid defense. It was now a framework for a life that was slowly, cautiously letting in new light, new experiences. The silence in his house was less oppressive, often punctuated by Snow's soft purrs or the quiet rustle of newspaper pages. One crisp autumn afternoon, Arthur was sitting on his porch, much like he had on that fateful day. But the man was different. He was reading a book on local history, Snow dozing at his feet. Mrs. Henderson waved from her garden. He waved back, a genuine smile on his face. The raw edges of his sorrow had softened, smoothed by time, by discovery, and by the unexpected gifts found within a broken wall and a dead woman's secrets. His new normal was quieter than his old life with Martha, but it was not empty. It was a life touched by mystery, by enduring love, and by the quiet companionship of a very special white cat, the unlikely catalyst for it all. They left a dead puppy at the beach, but a stray cat did the unthinkable. What hidden connection could possibly link a hardened solitary stray cat to a puppy lost miles away at sea? The truth involves a past encounter and a debt repaid in the most unexpected way. Revealing the cat wasn't just acting on instinct. Subscribe and like to hear the full astonishing story. The Atlantic wind whipped Martha's gray hair across her face, tasting of salt and the approaching storm. Dawn was a bruised smear on the horizon, barely illuminating the churning gray waves that clawed greedily at the Outer Banks shoreline. It was too early, too cold, too rough for her usual walk, but insomnia had driven her out. That's when she saw him, Rusty, the old orange tomcat, a fixture of the beach, as weathered as the driftwood, hunched defensively near the high tide line. But he wasn't alone. Curled beside him, nestled precariously close to the incoming surge, was a small, dark lump. Martha's heart sank. Another casualty of the ocean's indifference, or worse, human cruelty. As she drew nearer, the lump resolved into the unmistakable shape of a puppy, small, dark-furred, utterly still. Its fur was plastered flat with seawater and sand, limbs limp. Dead. Definitely dead. Rusty, normally aloof and skittish, hissed softly as Martha approached, a low rumble in his chest, placing a protective paw possessively on the puppy's flank. "Oh, Rusty," Martha murmured, her voice nearly snatched away by the wind. "What have you got there, poor thing?" She expected the cat to dart away as she got closer, but he held his ground. Amber eyes narrowed, fixed on her. The tide surged again, swirling around the tiny form, threatening to reclaim it. Panic tightened Martha's chest. Dead or not, she couldn't leave it to be washed away. She took another step, bracing against the wind. Rusty hissed again, louder this time, flattening his ears. He looked fierce, protective, almost desperate. It was completely out of character. He never cared about anything but his next meal and a dry place to sleep. Why this? Why now? She edged closer, her gaze locked on the puppy, expecting the finality of death. And then she saw it, or thought she saw it. A flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible twitch of an ear against Rusty's orange fur. Impossible! A trick of the wind, the shifting light. She held her breath, peering intently through the stinging spray. There it was again. A minuscule shudder rippled through the puppy's flank. It wasn't dead. Not yet. But the next wave was already gathering, a wall of gray water rushing towards the shore, towards the cat, and the spark of life he was inexplicably guarding. Martha Hayes had lived in the small Outer Banks town of Salvo, North Carolina, for 30 years. 15 of them alone, since her husband Bill, a fisherman, had been taken by the same unforgiving Atlantic. She now faced retirement, had settled quietly around her, filled with reading, tending her small garden battered by salt spray, and her daily walks along the shore. The beach was her solace, her connection to Bill, her constant companion. She knew its moods, its rhythms, its regulars, both human and animal. Rusty was one of the latter, an old warrior of a cat bearing the scars of countless battles. He materialized near the fish cleaning stations or the pier, accepting offerings of scraps with regal indifference before vanishing back into the dunes and marram grass. Martha, like a few other locals, often left out food for him near her porch, a silent understanding passing between them. He was wild, untamable, a spirit of the place. Seeing him now defending this scrap of life against the ocean itself felt fundamentally wrong, yet undeniably real. The puppy's faint twitch hadn't been imagined. It was alive, barely clinging to existence by a thread. Rusty seemed determined not to let snap. The incoming wave crashed closer, sending icy foam splashing over the cat and his charge. Rusty flinched, but didn't move, pressing himself tighter against the puppy. That was it. The decision crystallized in Martha's mind, sharp and clear amidst the wind's howl. She couldn't stand by. Bill would never have stood by. She ripped off her thick cardigan, the wool instantly damp in the spray. "Okay, Rusty?" She yelled over the wind, trying to keep her voice calm but firm. "Okay, boy, let me help. We have to move him, now." She approached slowly, deliberately, hands held out, palms open. Rusty watched her tense as a coiled spring, the low growl still vibrating in his chest. He clearly didn't trust her, didn't want her near his foundling. The wave receded, sucking sand and shells back into the gray churn, but the next one was building. Martha knew she had only seconds. She focused on the puppy, ignoring the cat's warning signals as much as she dared. She had to get it out of the water's reach. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, Martha lunged forward, scooping the tiny, cold body into her cardigan. It weighed almost nothing. Rusty yowled a startled, angry sound and swiped at her retreating arm, claws extended just enough to draw thin beads of blood. Martha barely registered the sting. She scrambled backwards up the sandy incline away from the surging tide, clutching the fragile bundle to her chest. She could feel the shallow, thready heartbeat against her own ribs. She stopped a safe distance up the beach, her own heart pounding. Turning to look back, Rusty stood where she'd taken the puppy, soaked and seemingly bewildered, looking from the empty space on the sand to Martha, then back again. He let out another plaintive meow, less angry now, more confused. Martha looked down at the puppy, nestled in her sweater. It was terrifyingly cold, its small body limp. Saving it from the waves was only the first step. Getting it warm, getting it help, that was the real challenge, and she had no idea if it was even possible. But looking down at that impossibly small creature, feeling the faint flutter of life, she knew she had to try. This was her inciting incident, the moment the storm-tossed morning turned into a desperate mission. She wrapped the cardigan tighter, shielding the pup as best she could, and turned towards home, breaking into a stumbling run against the wind. The race against time had begun. The short run back to Martha's small, sturdy cottage felt like miles. The wind tore at her, and the puppy in her arms felt increasingly cold and unresponsive. Inside, she worked frantically. She laid the pup on a thick towel near the old radiator, cranking the heat up. She gently rubbed its limbs with another towel, trying to stimulate circulation, her movements clumsy with fear and urgency. The puppy remained terrifyingly still, its breathing shallow, almost imperceptible. Was it too late? Had the cold and shock already done their work? She needed a vet. Immediately, Dr. Ramirez's clinic, the only one in their small community, didn't officially open for another hour. Martha found the number, her fingers trembling as she dialed the emergency line listed on the answering machine message. After what felt like an eternity, a groggy but professional voice answered. Martha explained the situation breathlessly. The beach, the cold, the near-drowning Dr. Ramirez listened patiently, then sighed. "All right, Martha, bring him in. Use the back entrance. But I have to warn you, if he's as bad as you say, hypothermia in a pup, this young is often irreversible." Hope warred with dread, wrapping the puppy in the driest, warmest towel she could find, placing it carefully in a cardboard box lined with more towels. Martha prepared to leave. As she opened her back door, she stopped. Sitting on the top step, drenched and looking thoroughly miserable, was Rusty. He stared at the box in her hands, let out a soft, questioning meow, then stood aside as she passed, his amber eyes tracking her every move. He didn't follow her to the car, melting back into the gray morning, but his presence felt like a silent, uncertain vigil. The drive to the clinic was agonizingly slow on the wet roads. Dr. Ramirez, a kind man with tired eyes, was waiting. He took the box immediately, his practiced hands assessing the puppy's condition. "He's ice cold," he murmured, shaking his head slightly. "Labrador mix, maybe. Very young, 6-7 weeks at most." He disappeared into the treatment room. Martha was left in the small, quiet waiting area, the smell of disinfectant sharp in her nostrils, her own hand still stinging from Rusty's claws. She sank onto a plastic chair, the adrenaline draining away, leaving her feeling shaky and old. Minutes stretched into an hour. Sarah, the young vet tech, came out occasionally, offering a weak smile but little news. "We're doing everything we can," Mrs. Hayes warming him slowly. "IV fluids." Her voice lacked conviction. Martha paced, prayed, stared out the window at the relentless rain. What was this puppy's story? How did he end up alone on the beach in a storm? Was he abandoned, lost, finally? Dr. Ramirez emerged, rubbing his eyes. "Okay?" He began, his tone cautious. "He's stable for now. We've got his core temperature rising slowly. He's responding just barely. The next 12 hours are critical." He paused. "One thing we did find." He held up a small, clear plastic bag. Inside was a sodden, grimy puppy collar. Cheap blue nylon. No tags. No identification. Doesn't look like he was wearing it long. It's barely worn. Abandoned. Then the thought settled like lead in Martha's stomach. Someone had just discarded him. Anger warred with pity. Dr. Ramirez continued, "He needs round-the-clock care for the next day or two minimum. It will be expensive, Martha. And honestly, his chances are still 50-50 at best." Martha didn't hesitate. "Do whatever it takes, doctor, whatever it takes." She thought of Bill, of the emptiness in her house, of Rusty's fierce, inexplicable protectiveness. This tiny life mattered. Over the next few days, Martha became a fixture at the clinic. She'd sit quietly by the incubator, where the puppy, now tentatively named Lucky by Sarah, lay hooked up to wires and tubes. He was slowly regaining strength color, returning to his gums, his breathing deepening. He even managed a weak flick of his tail. When Martha spoke softly to him, Dr. Ramirez remained cautiously optimistic. Meanwhile, the collar yielded no clues. Martha cleaned it meticulously, hoping for a faded name or number, but found nothing. She posted flyers with Lucky's picture at the post office, the grocery store, the tackle shop. She spoke to the local animal control officer, a pragmatic man named Miller, who took a report but offered little hope. "Happens all the time, ma'am." He'd said, not unkindly. "People dump animals, especially after tourist season ends or before it begins." Sad truth, but something felt off. Lucky was clearly a well-bred pup, not a typical stray mix. And Rusty's behavior. Why would that old stray care so much about an abandoned puppy? Martha visited the spot on the beach where she'd found them, searching for any other clues, anything missed in the storm's chaos. Nothing, just sand shells and the endless ocean. One evening, as she was leaving the clinic after Lucky managed to drink some milk replace on his own, she saw Rusty again. He was sitting across the street under a dripping oak tree, just watching the clinic entrance. As her headlights swept over him, he blinked slowly, then turned and disappeared into the shadows. A shiver went down Martha's spine. It felt less like coincidence, more like he was involved somehow, protecting, waiting. It made no sense yet. The feeling persisted. Lucky was getting stronger, but the mystery surrounding him deepened, and the financial burden of his care began to weigh on Martha's modest retirement savings. The stakes were rising, not just for Lucky's survival, but for uncovering the truth of his past. A week after the rescue, Lucky was out of the incubator, wobbling uncertainly around a small pen in the clinic's recovery area. He was still weak, still battling a slight respiratory infection from the inhaled seawater, but he was undeniably alive, a small black blur of clumsy paws and hopeful tail wags whenever Martha or Sarah approached. Dr. Ramirez finally declared him out of the woods, though recovery would be long. The immediate crisis was over, but a new one loomed Lucky's future, and the mounting vet bill Martha had already drained her emergency fund. "He's a fighter," Dr. Ramirez said, watching Lucky tumble over his own feet, trying to reach Martha's outstretched hand. "But he needs a permanent home. Martha, we can't keep him here indefinitely," and he hesitated, shuffling some papers. "The bill is substantial." Martha nodded, bracing herself. The figure Dr. Ramirez mentioned made her breath catch. It was more than 2 months of her fixed income. She felt a wave of despair. Had she done the right thing, only to face an impossible hurdle? Could she find him a home? Could she keep him? Her small cottage wasn't set up for a puppy, especially one needing ongoing care. Doubt gnawed at her. That afternoon, feeling overwhelmed, Martha went back to the beach. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear, crisp autumn day. The ocean was calmer, sparkling under the sun. She walked slowly towards the spot where she'd found Lucky, replaying that chaotic morning in her mind. Rusty's fierce protection, the rising tide, the tiny flicker of life. As she stood there lost in thought, something glinted near the dune grass half buried in the sand, pushed up by the storm surge. Curious, she knelt down. It wasn't a shell or sea glass, it was metal. Carefully, she dug it out. A small tarnished silver tag shaped like a bone. It must have come off Lucky's collar in the surf or during Rusty's ministrations. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She rubbed the sand away frantically. Engraved on one side, faint but legible, was the name Lucky. On the other, almost worn smooth, was a phone number, an actual phone number. This changed everything. He wasn't just abandoned. He had a name. He had belonged to someone. Hope surged through her, eclipsing the financial worries. She wasn't just rescuing a nameless stray. She was potentially reuniting a lost pet with its family. Her role shifted instantly. She wasn't just a rescuer anymore. She was an investigator, a link to Lucky's past. This was the turning point. There was no going back now. She had to find out who Lucky belonged to. She hurried back to her cottage, her mind racing. She carefully cleaned the tag under running water, using a soft brush. The phone number became clearer. A Maryland area code, not local. Interesting. Holding her breath, she dialed the number. It rang several times, then went to voicemail. A generic automated message. Disappointment pricked at her hope. She left a message explaining who she was, how she'd found a puppy named Lucky, and the tag, leaving her own number. She tried again an hour later. Same result. And again that evening. Nothing. Doubt crept back in. Was it an old number? Disconnected. Had the owner simply given up, gotten a new number, moved on? The tag felt like a promise, but one that might remain unfulfilled. As she sat nursing a cup of tea, staring at the silent phone, she saw movement outside her window. Rusty was on her porch railing, silhouetted against the twilight sky. He wasn't begging for food. He just sat there watching her through the glass. It was the closest he'd ever willingly come. Then he did something truly bizarre. He dropped something small and dark onto the porch floor. A dead mouse, its neck broken. An offering, a sign. Martha didn't know what to make of it. But seeing the old tomcat, the unlikely guardian, somehow strengthened her resolve. She wouldn't give up on Lucky or on finding his family. She would keep trying the number. She would figure this out. The point of no return had been reached the moment she found that tag days turned into another week. Martha kept Lucky at her cottage now, sectioning off her small kitchen for him. House training a boisterous recovering puppy in her 70s proved more challenging than she'd anticipated, testing her patience and her cleaning supplies. Lucky, however, thrived under her care, growing stronger. His playful personality emerging. He'd chase dust bunnies, chew on her slippers, gently reprimanded, and fall asleep, curled on an old blanket near the radiator, occasionally letting out soft puppy snores. A bond formed between them, quiet and comforting, filling a space in Martha's life she hadn't realized was quite so empty. The phone number from the tag remained a frustrating dead end. Voicemail after voicemail went unanswered. Martha felt her hope dwindling, replaced by a grim resignation. Perhaps Officer Miller was right. Maybe Lucky was effectively abandoned, the tag just a ghost of a former life. The vet bill arrived, a stark reminder of the financial reality. Martha started calculating what she might need to sell the anxiety, a constant knot in her stomach. Was she prepared to become Lucky's permanent owner with all the costs and responsibilities that entailed? One rainy afternoon, while sorting through old papers, trying to distract herself, Martha stared at the tarnished silver tag again. Maryland area code, a boat name, Lucky. Maybe it wasn't just the puppy's name. Could Lucky be the name of a boat? It was a long shot, but she had nothing else. Armed with this flimsy hypothesis, she drove to the local library. Using their public computers, she started searching online databases for registered boats named Lucky with home ports in Maryland. The list was dauntingly long. She spent hours scrolling through entries, cross-referencing names and locations, feeling increasingly foolish. Then she stumbled upon a recent Coast Guard incident report section on a maritime news website. It detailed minor accidents, rescues, and overdue vessel reports along the Atlantic coast. Her eyes scanned the entries for the past few weeks, and there it was, a brief report dated just 2 days before she found Lucky, a small recreational vessel, the Lucky Dog, registered in Annapolis, Maryland, had capsized in a sudden squall off the Virginia Capes about 60 miles north. 3 occupants rescued by a Coast Guard cutter vessel, lost. No mention of a dog. Her heart leaped. Lucky Dog, Annapolis, Maryland. The timing, the location, it all fit. The puppy wasn't named Lucky. The boat was the Lucky Dog. Adrenaline surged through her again. This had to be it. The report listed the owner's name, David Peterson. Finding David Peterson of Annapolis proved easier than expected. A quick online search revealed a marine supply business owner with that name, Martha, found the business number and dialed, her hand trembling slightly. This time, a person answered. A secretary with a brisk professional voice Martha asked for. Mr. Peterson explaining she had information regarding the Lucky Dog. There was a pause. Then the secretary's voice softened. Oh dear, Mr. Peterson isn't in. He and his family, they're still recovering from the accident. It was quite traumatic. Was there a puppy on board? Martha asked, holding her breath. A sharp intake of breath on the other end. Oh heavens, yes, Skipper, their little black lab puppy. They lost him when the boat went over. They're devastated, absolutely heartbroken. They searched the Coast Guard, searched, but nothing. I think I found him, Martha said softly, tears welling in her eyes. He washed ashore here in Salvo. He's alive. I called him Lucky. The secretary gasped. Alive. Oh, thank God, David, Susan, they'll be... I can't even imagine. Can you give me your number? I'll have Mr. Peterson call you the second he's able. The call came less than an hour later. David Peterson's voice was thick with emotion, disbelief, warring with burgeoning hope. He asked question after question about the puppy, about where and when Martha found him. He explained how Skipper, Lucky, had been swept away when a rogue wave hit the overturned boat before the Coast Guard arrived. They thought he was gone forever. The relief in his voice was palpable, raw, overwhelming. Arrangements were made immediately. The Petersons, David, his wife Susan, and their young daughter Emily, would drive down from Annapolis the very next day. Martha felt a confusing mix of emotions, immense relief that Lucky had a loving family waiting, profound sadness at the thought of letting him go, and a deep satisfaction that she hadn't given up. That night, Martha sat on her kitchen floor watching Lucky sleep. He looked so peaceful, so safe. She gently stroked his soft fur, whispering goodbye. Outside on the porch railing, unmoving in the moonlight, sat Rusty. He hadn't brought any more mice. He just watched a silent orange sentinel guarding the house, where the small life he'd protected was sleeping soundly, unaware of the reunion tomorrow would bring. The stage was set for the final act. The next afternoon, a mud-splattered SUV with Maryland plates pulled into Martha's gravel driveway. David, Susan, and young Emily Peterson climbed out, their faces etched with anxiety and hope. David was a sturdy man whose handshake was firm despite the tremor Martha could feel running through it. Susan's eyes were red-rimmed but searching, scanning the cottage expectantly. Emily, maybe 8 or 9 years old, clutched a worn stuffed dog. Her expression apprehensive, Martha greeted them on the porch, her own heart thudding. "He's inside," she said gently. "He's doing much better, but he's still a bit shy after everything." She led them into the kitchen. Lucky, hearing strangers, initially barked a surprisingly loud sound from such a small body before retreating slightly behind Martha's legs. "Skipper!" Susan whispered, her voice breaking. At the sound of his name, the puppy's ears perked up. He peeked out from behind. "Martha!" Emily dropped her stuffed toy. "Skipper, it's him!" she cried, rushing forward. "Skipper!" Lucky hesitated for only a second before recognition dawned. With a joyful yelp, he wriggled out, tail wagging furiously, launching himself towards the little girl. He covered her face in ecstatic puppy kisses, tumbling over her. In his excitement, Susan knelt beside her daughter, tears streaming down her face as she gathered the puppy into her arms, burying her face in his fur. David knelt too, stroking the dog, murmuring his name over and over, his voice thick with emotion. We never thought we'd see him again." David managed, looking up at Martha, his eyes shining. "After the boat went over the waves, he was just gone. We searched for hours." Martha explained how she'd found him, emphasizing Rusty's role, an old stray cat who lives on the beach. She clarified, seeing their bewildered expressions. He was curled around him, keeping him warm, protecting him from the tide. "I honestly don't think Skipper would have made it if not for that cat." The Petersons were astonished. "A cat," Susan repeated, "saved him." They looked around, half expecting to see Rusty appear. "He keeps his distance." Martha smiled faintly, but he was there. They talked for over an hour, the Petersons recounting the terrifying capsize, Martha detailing Skipper's rescue and recovery. They insisted on covering the entire vet bill, pressing a check into Martha's hand despite her protests. Seeing Skipper reunited with his clearly loving family confirmed Martha had done the right thing, though a pang of sadness hit her, knowing he would leave. The central conflict, Skipper's survival and future, was resolved. He was safe, he was loved, he was going home. The final decisive moment was watching him excitedly trying to herd the Petersons towards their car, ready for the next adventure. Saying goodbye was harder than Martha expected. She knelt and gave Skipper one last hug, whispering in his ear. He licked her face, then bounded happily towards the Petersons' waiting SUV. Emily waved vigorously from the back window as they pulled away. Skipper's black nose pressed against the glass. Martha watched until the car disappeared down the road, the silence of her kitchen suddenly feeling vast. She walked slowly down to the beach, the Petersons' check heavy in her pocket. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows on the sand. She reached the spot where it had all begun. She thought about the improbable chain of events, the storm, the lost puppy, the protective stray cat, the glint of a hidden tag, the kindness of strangers. As she stood there looking out at the now calm ocean, she saw a familiar flash of orange fur near the dunes. Rusty was watching her perched atop a piece of driftwood. For the first time, Martha walked towards him, not with food, but just towards him. He didn't bolt immediately as he usually would. He watched her approach, his amber eyes wary but steady. She stopped a few feet away. "He's gone home, Rusty?" she said softly, unsure why she was talking to a cat, but needing to say it. "His family came. He's safe now, thanks to you." Rusty blinked slowly. He didn't run. He simply sat there for a long moment, then gave a small flick of his tail, turned, and melted back into the sea. Oats and shadows, leaving Martha alone on the beach. Their strange partnership was over, but something had shifted between them. In the following weeks, Martha settled back into her quiet routine, but things felt different. The vet bill was paid, relieving a huge weight. The cottage felt a little emptier, but her heart felt fuller. She received photos and updates from the Petersons. Skipper, thriving, growing fast, clearly cherished. She found a new purpose volunteering a few hours a week at Dr. Ramirez's clinic, helping socialize kittens and comfort anxious animals. And Rusty? He remained the elusive spirit of the beach. But sometimes, when Martha left food out on her porch, he wouldn't wait until she'd gone back inside. Occasionally, he'd sit on the far end of the railing, while she sat on her porch swing, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, two solitary souls forever linked by the improbable rescue of a little lost dog on a stormy Outer Banks morning. The beach held its secrets, but sometimes it also revealed moments of unexpected grace.